It was the dead of night in August 2019 as a stolen digger was ripping through the wall of a small-town restaurant in Virginia, County Cavan. The plan was flawless, or so they thought. The digger gang, led by a former GAA footballer, had already stolen over €777,000 in cash from ATMs across Ireland, leaving behind a trail of destruction. However, as fate would have it that night, the gang's luck finally ran out. Gardaí, acting on a tip-off, swooped in, capturing two members while their leader, Daniel O'Callaghan, fled into the darkness. How did a seemingly unstoppable gang come crashing down in such dramatic fashion? Let me take you back to 2018, a time when a new kind of criminal operation started making headlines across Ireland. The gang behind those brazen crimes wasn't just any group of thieves. They were led by none other than Daniel O'Callaghan, a former GAA footballer from Crossmaglen, known for his days playing with the Crossmaglen Rangers. But instead of scoring goals on the field, O'Callaghan and his gang were scoring big by ripping entire ATMs from the walls of businesses across the country. This gang-base's operations was nestled in the rural areas of South Armagh and East Monaghan, regions that have seen their share of troubles over the years. But this was something different, something that shook these communities to their core. It wasn't just the thefts, it was the sheer audacity of how they went about it. Imagine waking up in your quiet town to find a massive hole where an ATM used to be, the machine gone, and the wall of the building left in ruins. That's exactly what O'Callaghan and his gang did, and they did it over and over again. Their criminal spree began in 2018, and it didn't take long for them to establish a terrifying reputation. They used stolen diggers and massive pieces of machinery to literally tear ATMs out of the walls. These diggers would be driven straight into the buildings, smashing through brick and concrete until they could latch onto the ATM and pull it out like a tooth. Banks, hotels, fuel stations, no place was safe from their destructive rampages. The damage left behind wasn't only a financial loss, it was a symbol of fear that gripped entire towns. Over a period of just 5 months, from 2018 to early 2019, O'Callaghan and his gang managed to rip off 6 ATMs, raking in a staggering €777,000. That's nearly €750,000 stolen right out from under the noses of businesses. The gang's operations were fast and highly effective. They would strike in the dead of the night, their stolen vehicles and diggers leaving nothing but chaos in their wake. When the police started piecing together the activities of the digger gang, it became clear that these criminals were operating on a level far beyond your typical smash-and-grab thieves. Their operations were meticulous, calculated, and executed with a precision that left little room for error. It was almost as if they were running a military campaign rather than a series of ATM heists. The gang planned every detail down to the last second, ensuring that each hit was as smooth and efficient as possible. The planning phase of each heist was intense. O'Callaghan and his crew studied the targets carefully before making a move. They would spend days, sometimes weeks, scouting potential locations, gathering information on everything from the security measures in place to the timing of police patrols. They knew exactly when to strike, and more importantly, how to get away before anyone could react. The stolen vehicles were always prepped in advance, often hidden away in remote locations until the night of the heist. The heavy machinery, particularly the diggers, was stolen and modified for the job. These machines were capable of ripping through walls like paper. The night of the Cavan raid in August 2019 was one of those moments that people in law enforcement live for. A chance to finally outmaneuver a criminal operation that had been running rampant across Ireland. By this time, the digger gang had become a menace, and the police knew that if they didn't stop them soon, they would continue their violent spree of ATM heists. It was a quiet evening in Virginia, a small town in County Cavan, when the gang made their move. They had their sights set on an ATM embedded in the wall of a local restaurant, a prime target for their usual method of operation. The gang had everything lined up. They'd stolen a powerful digger and positioned it near the restaurant, ready to tear through the wall and extract the cash machine in a matter of minutes. They were confident, maybe even overconfident, believing they could strike and disappear before anyone could react. But this time, the police were ready. Acting on intelligence, they'd positioned their units strategically around the area, waiting for the gang to make their move. They knew their patterns and methods and were determined not to let them slip through their fingers again. As soon as the digger began its assault on the restaurant's wall, the police moved in, fast and hard. The element of surprise was on the police's side, but they knew the gang wouldn't go down without a fight. As they approached, the scene erupted into chaos. The digger had already done significant damage, and the ATM was nearly dislodged, but the gang's attention quickly shifted from the machine to their own survival. O'Callaghan and his accomplices abandoned the digger and scattered. The police managed to capture 2 of the gang members on the spot, but O'Callaghan, the ringleader, was a different story. He bolted from the scene, disappearing into the surrounding fields under the cover of darkness. For a moment, it felt like he evaded the officials once again. The adrenaline was still pumping as the police teams secured the area, but there was no time to celebrate. O'Callaghan was out there, on the run, and they knew they had to find him before he could regroup, or worse, strike again. The search continued through the night and into the early hours of the morning. It was a relentless pursuit, combing through every possible hiding spot, questioning locals and following every lead, no matter how small. It wasn't until the police expanded their search to a series of outhouses on the outskirts of town that they caught their first big break. In one of the dilapidated structures, the police found evidence that someone had been there recently. Displaced straw, a makeshift bed, signs of a hasty departure. But it was the DNA evidence that sealed O'Callaghan's fate. The official forensic team moved quickly, collecting samples from the scene, and when the results came back, there was no doubt. The DNA matched O'Callaghan's, confirming that he had indeed been hiding out there after the raid. This was the turning point that the police had been waiting for. The forensic evidence tied O'Callaghan to the Cavan raid, giving them the leverage they needed to finally bring him to justice. It wasn't just about catching a criminal, it was about dismantling a gang that had caused untold damage and fear across multiple counties. The arrest of O'Callaghan marked the beginning of the end for the Digger Gang, as the evidence they gathered that night led to further arrests and convictions, effectively shutting down their operations. The foiled heist was a major turning point, not just because the police had managed to prevent another devastating ATM robbery, but because it gave them the evidence they needed to bring down the entire gang. The DNA evidence they found in that outhouse was the key. It linked O'Callaghan directly to the crime scene. The walls were closing in on him, and he knew it. In the weeks that followed, the police intensified their efforts, focusing on rounding up the remaining members of the gang. One by one, they were arrested, each facing a slew of charges that would make any criminal shudder. O'Callaghan himself was eventually captured, and that's when the legal process began to grind into action. The charges against him and his gang members were extensive, 16 offences in total, including theft, money laundering, and possession of stolen cash. The scale of their crimes was staggering, and the evidence the police had painstakingly gathered over months of investigation ensured that there would be no escape for them this time. O'Callaghan's trial at the Special Criminal Court in Dublin was a major event. The court, known for handling serious organised crime cases, was the perfect venue for a trial of this magnitude. The prosecution laid out the gang's activities in painstaking detail, from the planning of each heist to the execution and eventual laundering of the stolen money. O'Callaghan, once a respected GAA footballer, was now facing the full weight of the law. The court heard how he had masterminded the theft of over €777,000 from ATMs, leading to a gang that didn't hesitate to use violence and destruction of public or private property to get what they wanted. O'Callaghan's accomplices, who'd been arrested during and after the Cavan raid, were also brought before the court. Each one faced multiple charges, and the evidence against them was overwhelming. The stories of their crimes, told through witness testimonies, forensic evidence, and their own detailed investigation, painted a picture of a gang that operated with brutal efficiency. They were a well-oiled machine, but like all machines, they were vulnerable to a well-timed wrench in the works. In the end, justice was served. O'Callaghan was convicted to all 16 offences and sentenced to a lengthy prison term of 10 years imprisonment, ensuring that he would no longer pose a threat to society. His accomplices received similarly harsh sentences, each one reflecting the severity of their crimes. The sentences handed down weren't just about punishment, they were about sending a clear message to other would-be criminals that such actions would not go unpunished. For the law enforcement, it was a moment of both relief and satisfaction. The Digger Gang had been a thorn in their sight for too long, but now they were finally behind bars. The communities they terrorized could breathe a little easier, knowing that the men responsible were no longer free to continue their rampage. The downfall of the Digger Gang wasn't just the result of a single night's work. It was the culmination of months of relentless effort, careful planning, and a commitment to bringing justice to those who'd suffered at their hands. The capture of the Digger Gang brought a much-needed sense of closure to the communities that had been living under a cloud of fear and uncertainty for far too long. For months, these rural towns had been plagued by the gang's activities, with each new heist leaving a deep sense of vulnerability. Businesses that had served their communities for years were suddenly faced with the reality that they could be next, and the psychological toll on the people who lived and worked in these areas was immense. The financial impact of the gang's activities had been staggering. The sheer cost of repairing the damage left behind after each heist was enough to cripple some businesses, and for those that managed to stay afloat, the losses went far beyond the physical. Customers were wary, sales dropped, and in some cases, businesses had to close their doors permanently. The psychological impact was just as severe. Many in these small communities felt their trust shattered by the violence and audacity of the gang's crimes. It took time and a lot of community support for these towns to begin to heal. But the aftermath of the Digger Gang's reign of terror also brought to light some broader implications that went beyond the immediate impact on these communities. Banks and local authorities were forced to reassess their security measures, leading to changes in how ATMs were installed and protected, especially in remote locations. Moreover, the capture of the Digger Gang highlighted the importance of cooperation between police forces on both sides of the border. The gang had operated across Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland, exploiting the challenges of cross-border law enforcement to their advantage. But the successful takedown of the gang was a testament to the increased collaboration between the Gardaí and police service of Northern Ireland. So what are your thoughts on the Digger Gang's story? Let us know in the comments below. If you do like our content, don't forget to check out the channel. We've got many more stories from the underworld to share with you. We'll see you in the next one.